Hello and welcome back to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft, and welcome back to part 2 of Dreamcatcher, my build of this beautiful little kit from Airfix, the brand new 48 scale Spitfire TR9 2-seater. So in episode 1 you'll have seen me put this thing together and apply this radical surface treatment that you can see before you now. And indeed I have already taken the first couple of steps towards laying the paint and camouflage on this model. That being that I've painted the canopy areas. I first painted them in the interior green colour that I use, and I've then overlaid black on top of that, and that is to remove any tendency for these areas to be a little transparent and not quite look the same as the rest of the finish. That is always the first thing I do with any sort of paintwork. Don't worry too much if you look at this and think, big black bits. You can cover it up, absolutely no problem with the paint going forward. So that's the main model pretty much ready to go. So I thought the first thing I should really do is talk about paint and colours, and indeed the scheme that I'm going to be applying to this aircraft. So scheme first then, I picked up this decal set here, because this covers me for what I want to do. So I'm going to finish this model as PV202, and that aircraft is in fact one of the two options provided for by the kit, but the kit provides decals for 202 as she was here in the early 50s in the service of the Irish Air Corps. I didn't want to do that, no offence to anybody Irish, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to build my model as one of the two-seaters that operates now. So I was scanning through some photos and I found a picture of one which had JW on the side, and since my name is Jennifer Wright, I thought, well, I'm going to do that one. A little more digging led to the discovery that that is in fact PV202, and there's a lovely history piece on the Aerial Collective Duxford website, and I'm going to read a bit of it out to you now. Well, I'll summarise it now. So the aircraft was built originally in the Vickers Supermarine factory at Castle Bromwich, and was first delivered to the RAF No. 3 maintenance unit based at Lynham in Wiltshire. I spent 9 years living and working at Royal Air Force Lynham. It was here that the aircraft was brought up to operational standard and was moved to No. 84 Ground Support Unit at Thruxton in Hampshire. The aircraft then entered active service in October 1944 with 33 Squadron operating from Merville and northern France. He was there with the codes 5RQ. Participated in ground support operations as Allied forces pushed into occupied Europe. The aircraft briefly moved to Belgium before returning to UK in mid-December 1944. During its time with 33, PV202 completed 20 operational sorties with 10 different pilots. In early 1945, PV202 was issued to 412 Squadron Royal Canadian Air Force, who were operating out of Holland, and during this time the aircraft flew with the codes VZM and later VZW, and by the end of May 1945 had carried out a further 76 operational sorties and was credited with downing 3 enemy aircraft, 2 Focke-Wulf 190s and 1 Messerschmitt 109. Later that month the aircraft returned to the UK and went into storage, and this is where this story begins. So, although built as a single-seat LF Mark 9, Vickers Armstrong at Eastleigh wanted to build some trainers, and this was one of the aircraft selected for conversion. Initially flew with the Irish Air Corps until the late 60s, and then didn't fly again until the early 90s. Purchased then in 2001 by Historic Flying Limited, which is now part of the Aircraft Restoration Company. The aircraft was damaged and written off, but eventually flew again in 2005 back in her authentic Irish Air Corps colours. Then in 2007 was repainted to depict one of 3 Dutch TR9s, and then again as a Mark 1 of 19 squadron in 2010. In 2014 the aircraft was repainted once more into a 33 squadron scheme, representing codes similar to those that it wore in 1944. Then in late 2022, after another busy flying season, the aircraft was taken out of the air for a full overhaul, stripped back to bare metal for a detailed structural inspection and major servicing of all of the aircraft systems. And at this point another paint scheme was applied, and they wanted one with a link to the aircraft's own history, and so they decided to represent Spitfire Mark 9 ML365 as it was flown by Group Captain Peter Russell Johnny Walker, CBE, DFC and DSO. The scheme is connected to PV202 as ML365 was another 135 wing 2nd Tactical Air Force Base Spitfire. It's highly likely that both aircraft were in the same area at the same time, hence the link. The aircraft is now based at Duxford, and you still can go for flights in her with the Aircraft Restoration Company, and that is how she looks right now. And that's what I want to represent. So the codes and things are not really a big problem for me, but I didn't trust myself to be able to hand paint that little whiskey guy on the side, but I thought such a famous scheme, there must be decals for it. I went through my own collection and didn't find anything, but I found this rather lovely sheet online at Hannets. This sheet by Dutch Decals or DK Decals does focus in on the 2nd Tactical Air Force machines, and there are quite a few different ones, high backs and low backs here, but included among them is ML365 JW. So everything I need apart from the PV202 serial is on this sheet, and I have to say these decals do look absolutely beautiful. Initially I thought I'd probably just use the Whiskey Man and get masks made up for the rest, but these do look very, very nice indeed. It's a beautiful sheet, lots of different roundels. Here's all the serials, and here are the individual markings and indeed the rest of the serial. So here are my two Johnny Walkers. I can get the 202 out of here. I can get the P by modifying an R, which only leaves V's, and I'm fairly sure I'll be able to fudge that together with some handmade masking. So that's my plan. PV202 in the markings as was of ML365. I can use, should I decide to put any of them on, I can use stencils from the kit sheet, walkways, wingtip steady trestles, things like that. They're all on the kit sheet and I can use those. So the next part of the recipe is the colours to use, and that's very, very simple because it's these. These paints, and I know I did explain this in a very recent video, but I'll do it again because it's actually relevant to this aircraft. Tamiya acrylics, XF 81, 82 and 83, and as you can see from my nifty labels, I'll try and find the guy that did these. He's on Instagram, and I'll put a link for these labels because they are dead handy. These are specifically RAF, dark green, ocean grey and medium sea grey, and these were released by Tamiya at the same time as their formidable 132nd Mark 9 kit. These were released at the same time, obviously for painting that model, and I really like them. This ocean, well, all of them are really good matches to my eye, and I've used them ever since, so I will be using these. And I will of course begin with painting the underside. I am yet to master the wheelbase, but I will. Now this black panel line and rivet architecture here, I think I might have forgotten to mention in the last video, I deliberately didn't flat down the black that's on this trailing edge. You can probably see there, it's still solid black, and I did that on purpose to further minimise the visual impact of the thickness of this trailing edge. I hope that'll work. But yes, I need to build up the colour in thin, smooth layers until I'm happy with the amount of this black that remains visible, if any. I won't be sad if it's completely gone, it won't bother me, but it's just there. It'll help just provide a bit of depth into things like the control surface recesses and what have you, and obviate the need for me to muck about with actual pre-shading or anything like that. And you join me again with 2 out of the 3 main colours applied, and the surface is done with XF83. When I was finished spraying this, it was quite flat and a little bit rough, so I applied a single coat of stupidly thin X22. I'm going to say probably 90% thinners, just a thin light coat, which had the effect of sort of blending everything a little bit, and it soaks through the acrylic paint and it really just homogenises the layer. And then that was just very, very gently knocked back with, you guessed it, a bit of Trizac. With that dry, I've moved on to the XF82, the ocean grey. Clearly working lightest to darkest. I do still work that way round 99 times out of 100. And I've applied this with the airbrush in the general, or fairly close pattern to what it needs to be. I've used this diagram in the instructions in conjunction with a couple of photos because it does pretty much match what I'm trying to achieve. And this is as it has come out of the airbrush. It's very, very minimal, sort of, you can hear very, very slight roughness about it, and it is very slight. So as ever, a little bit of Trizac, just give it, and it is literally a once over, just denib it. And the reason I do this, it's very, very simple, is because when I come to put the green on, if I make a mistake at any point and I want to try and just gently nib that mistake away, that slight rough surface will make it basically impossible to remove any mistake, because the very slight undulations and bits and pieces will capture the green, and the only way you'll be able to get rid is by going back to smooth. And if there isn't enough grey paint there to do that, which there probably isn't, you won't be able to get rid of it. By smoothing it first, it just gives you a fighting chance, should you need it, of getting rid of any imperfections. It also, secondary effect, remove any sort of roughness that may have built up around the edges of these areas of camouflage from overspray. It removes that too, which again helps to negate any risk of this coat affecting the next one. So that's what I do. I'll go around the whole thing, just nip round it, denib it, and then I can start on the green. I did use the therapy putty. There it is. I've got some green. This is medium. For the demarcations with the underside colour. This the real aircraft has fairly tightly sprayed, hand sprayed demarcations, but to save a bit of time and effort and a bit of cross-eyedness, I used therapy putty. I made quite thin worms like so, and just used that where necessary. We do have D-Day stripes on this, which extend for most of this area actually. But I've masked it roughly along the sort of traditional area where it would break normally. And when I come to put the green on shortly, I'll remask it as necessary. Right, you can't leave this on the model for any length of time because of the way it pulls back into itself. So once I've finished giving this a little nib, and here's the canopy also in grey, I will move on to the XF81 coat. And here we are with the main colours on, all 3 of the Tamiya colours all applied. And there again with this top surface there is a thin layer. I've already done a thin layer of X22 and I've just nibbed that back again with a bit of Trizac. I don't want a super heavy gloss right now, I just wanted to seal in these colours and to protect them basically, because now the next thing I need to do is add some invasion stripes. This is the aircraft I'm modelling, at Duxford, as you can see, and I need to add the Sky ID band and this set of under fuselage invasion stripes. Now obviously I don't have decals for any of this, not that I'd use them if I did. Honestly, I was always going to paint these, so I need to mask up for this area. And what you can see that I've already done is I've made some pretend roundels. So I've cut these from the big sheet. This is the ammo masking sheets, A4 size, very thin, nice yellow tape. And I used the decal sheet that I'm going to be using, and I did some experimental circles, as you could see, until I had a size which exactly covers this decal. If anything, you need this mask to be very slightly smaller than this decal, but I'm talking slightly, like 0.5 mil. Because what you don't want is to apply the decal later and find that you've got a big camouflage smiley face underneath your roundel. But at the same time, I don't want black and white stripes where I then have to set this roundel down, because you tend to be able to see the black and white stripes through a decal usually. So that's why these are here. I've ended up with it set at this. This is not precise enough to give you a specific measurement, but that's how this has been set. I've cut the circles and then I've positioned them on the model best I can in accordance with this photograph. So now I can mask up for the invasion stripes themselves, and looking at it, I don't know if you can see on the photo, but I think you should be able to. This line here, do you see this kind of almost looks like a shadow? That is the main sort of big panel line, if you like, that you can quite clearly see on the model that runs along. So I'm going to use that as coincidental and useful because it runs with the datum, and I'm going to use that as the top edge of my invasion stripes. Bit lazy, but it works. And at the back, they coincide with the transport joint at the bottom. Yeah, the bit where the tail bolts off from the rest of the fuselage, the stripe ends at the bottom at that joint. At the front, I haven't got a handy reference point, other than it does appear from this photo that the front edge of the wire is pretty much, if not slightly ahead of the edge of the cockpit aperture there for the rear cockpit. So on the model, you're talking the front edge here or just ahead of it, and the rear edge at this transport joint at the bottom but vertical, and then the stripes running this panel line parallel back. So I will get on with masking that. The sequence of painting will be, once I've got it masked out, I will paint white and then black and then sky for the band itself. Alright, well, you join me now, and nearly all of the colours are on. I have my D-Day stripes with a nice little cutout for the roundel and the sky band. And the tools used here were very simple. I used a divider and I used a steel rule. And effectively I cut, as you already know, I used the panel line to help me with the horizontal level, and then I used the dividers to help me get things parallel coming down. So the ends, initially I would measure to a salient point, say this panel line, and make sure that the tape was running parallel with it. And then when it came to actually doing the bands themselves, I measured my overall length and I came up with 9.5, it was 9.6 mil as the bandwidth, and I used the dividers to gently mark. If you're very careful, you can hold the divider on the model, and I could just ever so gently drag it across the surface. It will leave a sort of a a very slight shiny mark on the paint that you can see in the right light, and I then used that to get the tape on, and again used it all the way around to make sure that they're following each other parallel. I did want these to come out reasonably tidy. This is a restored aircraft after all said and done, and these very definitely have not been slapped on with a broom. So that's how I did that. Cut narrow tapes of Tamiya tape, narrow strips, so that they'll conform to the curves and I can keep the lines straight. And I used the steel rule to cut the strips and to help set the dividers up. And then the dividers for everything else. So after that was all on, I've given the whole model another coat of X22, very, very thin, about 70 to 80% thinners at this point, and just one coat, one smooth coat, not super heavy, not super wet, just a nice smooth coat over the entire model, and that's given this really lovely smooth gloss, which is very adequate for decalling, and it's just sealed everything in, and it's going to protect all of these coats of paint. I do think now that rubbing down as I did was worth the effort. It was probably an extra 2 to 4 hours of effort to get this entire surface rubbed down, because now the model is perfectly smooth and all of that heavy riveting and panel lines has blended itself in really rather beautifully. I hope you can see that that rivet detail is far less obtrusive. It's there if you look for it, you can see it, but it's not overtaking your visual impression of the model, which I feel it was, and I have seen finished examples of this kit, and especially the fuselage. What you noticed straight away is the rivets, they're just a bit too much, but so I get the light on there, you can see now they blend into the surface much better. To my eye at least, to me it was worth the effort. Anyway, the last bit of painting to do is some ID bands on the leading edges. I need a bit of yellow for the leading edge strips. I'll paint those now, even though I've already done the gloss coat for decals, because this is quite a glossy yellow anyway, but I don't want to do it after the decals are on, because obviously the roundels will need to get masked over, and I don't want to take that risk. There's no need to. So I'll spray the yellow bands on, and then this is going to have to be set aside for a day or two. I need this paint to harden off nicely, and it does need a day or two really to really properly cure down before I start throwing decal solvents onto it. And while I'm waiting for that, I've got these parts. There aren't that many, to be fair, but I'll take these parts, get all of these painted up, weathered as applicable, whilst I'm waiting on this to get nice and dry. Now you join me halfway through decaling, and more often than not, even on fairly simple decal jobs like this, I tend to do it in batches, and I do that so that I don't inadvertently touch and shift the position or remove or wrinkle up or just in any way spoil decals I've already fitted when I'm handling it to do the other side, as it would be in this case. So these are already on and are nice and dry, and these are some really nice decals. Very liking them. They're going on really nicely, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to apply one or two now and just go through the process I've been using. Here's a close-up then. See how nicely these have conformed, sat in the surface detail very well, aided by the Mark 1 fingernail, of course. And you can probably see some of the sort of staining and marking around the roundel. You see that I get from using the decal fix. It does damage the surface of the paint a little bit, which is frustrating. But it does happen, but it isn't anything you need to worry too much about, as long as you're a little bit sensible. I can show you, if I just wet that area, that damage becomes invisible again. So another little light coat of clear will mitigate these little bits of slight damage to the paint. You can see it there as well. See, it's a shadow in the light there, but when you wet back over it, it goes away, so it's all fine, nothing to worry about. Anyway, let's go in with the fuselage roundel, because this has got a little lump that it has to conform to, so it's a good one to show the process with. And I've just got an old jar, very old actually, with some just ordinary tap water in it. Dip the decal in and just hold it down in there for a few moments. Don't let it go and float around in the water for ages, that's actually a bad idea. And then let it sit and wait for it to release from its backing paper, which these decals do seem to take a minute or two to really soak and release themselves. Right, and when it's finally released, here we go, it's nice and easy to move. We get started on the process. So I use SmartFit as my setting solution, and all the setting solution is kind of it's just a wetter. See how it sits on the surface there, it doesn't just puddle up straight away. And I grab my decal and I need to plonk it in that puddle like so. And this is where you find out that your roundel masking was the right or the wrong size. Now I know mine was okay because I've already fitted one on the other side. And I'll just fidget this into position till it fits just right. Then my little roundel cut out like that. And then with the cotton bud, I just want to soak up and very, very gently just grabbing off the worst of that fluid. And I'm doing it very gently because I don't want to move the decal, and initially as you start to try and roll the moisture out from underneath the decal, they do have a tendency sometimes just to move a little bit, and I don't want that. Now I've got it settled where I want it, and it's not really going to move now, so I can apply a little bit more pressure and working always from the centre outward and rolling the cotton bud across the decal, and that's pushing out this excess water from the decal, adhesive from the decal, and the Tamiya decal solution. There we go. And it should look something like that. You can see there's a little bit of wrinkling around that raised detail, which you would expect, but it's gone down very, very nicely, considering. And with a little bit of slightly more determined pressing, we can actually get rid of all the wrinkles around there. But to finish things off, I'll use the softener. For that I'm using the MkIX Decal Fix. I do find this to be very good for softening and smoothing down decals, but as I've said a few times now, it is a little bit naughty to the paint, so don't put too much on, especially where it overlaps onto your paintwork. If you're struggling with silvering, for example, this is probably not the best thing to use because you're going to want to put a bit on there. You need it to get under the decal, and you run the risk of having paint problems that are going to end up being more trouble than your naughty decal. So I'll leave that a few moments, not too long. This time I need to make sure my cotton bud is quite damp because I don't want it to pick up and damage the surface, which it could do if it was dry, because this paint is very slightly softened now by this solvent, this decal solvent. And yes, I am touching it, and I know a lot of people say don't, but I do find this works. Again, the same sort of rolling motion, just pushing any more trapped moisture out. But now around this raised detail I'm going to press literally just pushing the decal down, physically pressing it in and around that detail, making sure there aren't any wrinkles or bubbles left anywhere underneath this marking. And there you go. We're going to end up looking like that. So all pressed in, you can already see the rivets and panel lines. It's gone down an absolute treat, and I found that throughout with these decals. They're working beautifully. These products seem to suit them, but clearly everyone has their own favourite decal solvents. By all means, use whatever you're used to using. This is what I'm using on this occasion, and yeah, these decals are working wonderfully. I'm really, really pleased with them. I have a few left, as you can see down here. These are the main markings, and I've got these stencils off the Airfix kit sheet, but I'm also going to grab most of the other stencils off the Airfix kit sheet as well, and I'll be gradually popping all of those into place over the next several hours. Well, I've got masking all over it again, and you could be thinking, what on earth? What's going on? Well, I'm filming this this little segment really just to remind, I guess, everyone that everything doesn't go right all the time. Even well accomplished modelers like myself have issues at times. Things go wrong, or things don't go quite right, or quite as right as you'd like them to, or you're just dissatisfied with a certain aspect of a build sometimes, and that has happened here. So I've got the decals on, the bulk of them. The main markings are all on, and I decided to fit some stencils because I could see some stenciling on some of the photos of the aircraft I'm modelling. So I thought, okay, put some stencils on, and I've rustled up bits and pieces of stencils from various decal sheets, because the ones in the kit, some of them were the right type, some of them were not. So essentially I've got bits and pieces out of old Edward stencil sheets. I've got some dry rub decals from a what is it, Hobby Decal dry rub sheet. These are a great idea. I don't know why these aren't more easily available. And I got to the point of putting the red patches on for the gun ports. Now this aircraft doesn't in fact have guns or gun ports, but it still has the red squares. Initially I thought I'll just use the Airfix decals. I put one on and I chucked them away because they are shaped like a chevron, but they don't fit either way up. They're off to one side of the no good. Bin those. Alright, I'll use these Edward ones. So this is a Edward stencil set out of one of the dual box things. Put those on. They're much too long. The carrier film was peeling off even as I was trying to put the thing down. They're washed out. They just looked rubbish. So this gap in the leading edge yellow here is where I removed one of them, which does graphically show you how the decal solvents actually can and do damage the paint. There's a remnant still here. So what I'm doing now is I've touched up the grey back here. It was damaged by the decal. I've remasked these leading edge stripes because I wasn't ever actually honestly happy with them. They weren't wide enough, and I wasn't happy with the opacity of the yellow. They don't look vivid enough compared to the real aircraft. So even though I added a wing walk decal because I couldn't be bothered to mask up to spray one, I've ended up masking the whole wing again anyway, so as to redo these yellow leading edge stripes. So that's a long story to tell you the bit that I needed to tell you, which was how I've done this without risking these decals. I wanted to speak about that quickly because it's a useful bit of info. So I've used tape over these roundels. Both the upper and lower roundels have tape over them, but what I've done is I've put the tape on upside down. So there's a square of tape over this underwing one, and it's upside down, so it is not stuck to that decal, it's covering it up, and I've then taped around it. there's tape that's the right way up. So the tape cannot harm these decals because I've laid it on upside down like that. I've done the same on the top. It's kind of annoying because I keep sticking to the thing, but there you go, it's not stuck. I cut the front part of the roundel is covered by a piece of 18mm tape which I cut into a half moon to stick over it because there's not much space between the front of the roundel and this leading edge stripe. But that's your top tip for this segment. Well, two really. One is, don't be afraid to go back and do over if you have to. This was just going to annoy me for the rest of the build and beyond. I knew that. I've known that since I did them, and I've ended up redoing them in the end. If I'd have just redone them in the first place, it would have been quicker and easier. But these gun port decals still probably would have been annoying. So here we are. And to enable the yellow to be more vivid and pop a little better, I am going to spray medium sea grey into this entire area to give a nice pale base for the yellow paint to then go over. Well, that was a slog, wasn't it? Okay, so I, as you saw, remasked and resprayed the leading edge strips, and I'm pleased that I did. They look a lot better now. Then I masked and sprayed the red bits, and I chose to just put them onto the yellow. I don't know if they should come back further or not, but I chose to do them that way. And after that, all that was left to do, I put some stencils on the bottom. I put the trestle markings on and some of the stencils, just a few, nothing, not as many as I could perhaps. I'm not sure how many this aircraft carried, but I've just put a couple on. Likewise around the rest of the airframe. So all that was left was the walkways. So I was going to use, in fact I started to use the Airfix kit decals to do this, and very quickly remembered that I hate walkway decals because I don't know if it's me, I really struggle to get them to behave. There's no inherent problem with Airfix walkway decals actually, but I was getting there, but then I messed it up basically, long story short. Oh, you know what, to hell with this. So I've masked and sprayed the walkway lines in black as well. So I could have done that at the same time in the end. So that was that. And the final piece of the puzzle was to sort out the serial. So I've pieced together the P and the 202 from the decal sheet, and the V I just cut a little mask made myself for the V. They're a little bit lopsided. The twos don't match properly, but you know, it'll do from a few feet away. In the meantime, with all of that, oh, and finally, 2 coats, very, very thinned down X22. You're looking at 85% thinners. So it's sealing these decals and whatnot in, bringing everything to this sort of a similar sheen. I haven't done the whole model, just where the decals are. Sealing it all in so I can do a bit of wash here and there without worrying about it ruining the decals. And that's the sort of finish I've got. You can see that it's very flat. It's shiny, but it's very smooth. And this will all get Trizact again before I put any wash on. And then I will mix a custom batch of VMS, a little bit shinier than what I currently have. It's a sort of a satin. But it's looking pretty cool. It's bright and it's not worn out, which is what you want. This is a warbird after all said and done. So next up will be a little bit of wash here and there. I'm going to put some dirty belly effects in there because even warbirds have dirty bellies. And then this will be matte coated. And whilst I've been in and out of doing these decals and spraying bits and pieces on here, I've also decaled the propeller. These are the Airfix kit decals. I've sealed these in with a brush and a coat of the MkIX acrylic gloss. Just a quick brush coat on there because I applied these decals on top of this satin finish. And what I will do is flat coat the whole propeller and then I'll mask it and apply the satin coat again on the roots. And the rest of the parts are all painted, so I have spinner and back plate. These are painted and have been VMS'd already. If I just put that together, it does look rather nice. The red used here is a custom mix that I made. It was based on Mr. Colour. Is it RLM04, the German red colour? It was based on that, so it's not a super bright, it's a little bit pinkish. And then here we've got the undercarriage legs. These have been painted with LP11, and then I've brush painted the oleos with chrome silver. Wheels and tyres, again LP11, with they've put a little bit of black wash in there just to highlight the details a bit. Tail wheel the same, LP11 and black wash. And the exhausts, which I drilled out. These are painted, they were painted black first, and then they were painted with Mr. Metal Colour stainless. They've then had a coat of black Tamiya enamel wash over them, which has been buffed off, and that's how they are. They will get a bit more work done on them yet. And the undercarriage doors. Rear canopy sits in there. I will put that back on when I put the flat lacquer or the flat clear on the rest of the aircraft. So we're going great guns. I need to leave this to dry for a few days to really get dried through, and as I say, it will be washers and flat coat. So I sort of skipped a step, didn't I? I have done a little bit of wash, and I forgot to really say anything about it, and I have now flat coated the model. This is, in the end, I've used my normal mix of VMS, which is almost all gone. I've got to make a new batch, and this is the satin varnish, and it's important to realise that the labelled satin varnish in the VMS range is in fact extremely matte. The matte is even more matte, but the satin is very definitely matte by most people's standards. So it's some of this, and to that I add a touch of this, which is the gloss, and as you can see, the gloss is significantly less thick. It has a much lower viscosity than the satin and the matte. So I put a bit of satin in here, a bit of gloss, and then a little bit of the proprietary VMS airbrush thinners. I did try, before I shelled out on the proprietary stuff, I did try IPA Tamiya X20A, which is actually a very good acrylic thinner and does normally work. I tried IPA X20A, I tried Mr. Colour thinners, none of which really gave satisfactory results. It is perfectly possible and viable to use X20A and IPA, actually, they do work, but they alter the properties of the matte fairly substantially and leave visually a slightly sort of a grainy finish, which I don't like. So I shelled out on the labelled stuff, and it is better. If you use the thinners on its own, if you use enough to get the matte coat thin enough to go through your airbrush nicely, it does affect the properties a bit. But by mixing in a little bit of this gloss, it sort of mitigates everything. So a bit of gloss, bit of thinners, gets it thin enough to work, but it still remains matte. It's not fully super flat matte, granted, but I'm not a big fan of that type of finish anyway, so it's not a big issue for me. Anyway, here it is with said flat coat, and it has brought the finish together rather nicely, and you can see there's definitely a sheen there. It's not water-time worn out flat, it's just not glossy. All demasked and looking rather swanky, I think. Also the propeller and spinner, so I flat coated the whole propeller and then masked it and just added a little bit of the Alclad / Ammo of MkIX acrylic gloss over the area where the stencils are, front and rear, for that sort of glossy patch that they tend to have. Again, it looks like a modern airworthy bit of kit. It's perfect. It's nice to build something now and again that you can just unashamedly not make it dirty and not feel bad about it or think you have to come up with some sort of story. This does still rotate as designed by Airfix, which, if you're bothered about that or not, and I'll glue that in when I've got most of the propeller's one of the last things I generally attach. I did flat coat the undercarriage doors as well at the same time. Before I flat coated, I used Tamiya panel line accent in the dark grey, and I only put it on removable panels, so areas like the gun bay panels, the inspection panels, things like that, I only put it there, so there's not much, it's just enough. You can quite clearly see here it's just popped those panels out of the surface a little bit, but I haven't used it to add any dirtiness because I don't feel it's appropriate. However, having a dirty belly is a thing, even on a modern, well restored, well cared for aircraft. Now, bear with me 1 second. And when I say a dirty belly, I really just mean daily dirt and grime, oil from the engine essentially. So here's one of the photographs I'm using. If you look at the area just in front of that carburetor intake, you can see an oily streak coming back there. You can see that the undercarriage leg isn't entirely clean, but I'm not going to replicate that, to be fair. And if you look at the bottom, the underside of the wing in the flap area, and coming back from the wheel part of the wheel bay, you can see a reasonably large amount of crud actually, mostly oil based on the flap, also red crowbar. Here you can very easily see the exhaust staining, the mess from the exhaust, and if I come back a little bit more, the presence of that white D-Day stripe really does show off the oil, and that is purely oil that's come back, it's leaked from the Merlin and it's been blown back in the airstream. Now obviously, being a modern warbird that's restored and looked after and cared for and kept clean, these stains are not left there to fester like they may have been back in the day. They do get cleaned off regularly, so it's still perfectly your choice as the modeller whether or not you want to put any of this on the model. Here, I'm sorry about the reflections, but you can still see evidence there on the tail wheel, the leg, and under the tail plane, and even on the bottom of the rudder. That's all just blown back mess from the engine. I don't think most of these aircraft, they don't typically always use the grass. In fact, here we're taking off and it's clearly on the paved runway. So dirt and nonsense from a grass runway isn't really something we need to worry about, but they do park and move about on grass routinely, so I'm not too worried about that. But I am going to put a little bit of streaking, a little bit of mess on the underside, not a lot, just a bit. So here I've applied then some oil, not too much, as you can see. There's a suggestion really. These will get cleaned probably almost on a daily basis, so it's reasonable to not put too much on there. It would be reasonable also to put none at all on if that's your preference. But that's the start I've made. I've used Ammo of MkIX fresh engine oil. I like this. It's got a good sort of look about it. It doesn't look fresh to me, frankly, but you know, fresh oil isn't as dark as that. But that said, it does, I think, look pretty oily. and it will dry glossy, just bear that in mind. I have added this over the top of the flat coat. I'm going to say now, I would suggest if you're not confident or reasonably well practiced in doing this over the flat coat, then don't do it over the gloss, because it's much harder to get rid of this over a flat coat than it is over the gloss. If you're doing it over the gloss and you decide you just don't like it, you can clean it all off fairly successfully, but over the matte coat it sort of soaks in a little bit and it makes it much harder to get rid of. So practice doing these kind of effects over your gloss coats until you're comfortable with them. But that said, again, I wanted it to be glossy because it is an oil stain, so it should have a sheen to it. Yes, I'm going to further enhance this, although subtly, using AK wash for engines and turbines. This is still just wash, but this is normal, not glossy, and it's a sort of a dark, deeper brown. Another option would be engine grime. This is an ammo one, and this is much more in the grey scale of things, but I want to go with the brown on here. But I'm letting this dry a bit first because you need to build this up in layers. You can't just add it all in one go, it'll just mix up and make a mess. So you need to be able to let things sort of dry off in between applications to be able to build up a sort of layers of different streaks and effects. But here it is for a start. This is it for the belly then. That's my oils. Just a little bit of that additional darker colour, as you can see, principally sort of emanating here along these two panel lines and kind of just blending back through across those wing root fairing panels. I've added some clear orange paint to the downward looking ident lamp, and that is very simply a little bit of X26, and that was applied with a paintbrush just carefully onto that clear lens. And as you can see, I have fitted the undercarriage legs and wheels. Now the legs is a very neat system Airfix have adopted here, and it has led to a very realistic looking representation. Actually, what you can't see here is there's a spigot which heads off inboard from here into a square peg, and that's really what's taking the load here. And I've used Ammo of MkIX Ultra Glue. I use this increasingly in final assembly. It does make things take longer, but it's plenty strong enough and very forgiving. So that's in there, and then there's a bit of liquid cement on, see that pivot point there, just hold it steady. And then the wheels are held in place also with Ultra Glue. These are keyed, these wheels, they come pre-flat spotted by Airfix, and they are keyed to the undercarriage leg, but there is a reasonable amount of play, so do take a little bit of care to figure out exactly where they need to sit. See, I painted a red creep mark on across the tyre and the wheel rim there, as per the real thing. Pitot tube is also held in with Ammo Ultra Glue, and actually so is the tail wheel leg. And that really is pretty much it. The only things I have left to add are the canopies, the propeller assembly and the exhausts. And I finished up the exhaust, here is one for you close up, with Tamiya Weathering Master powders, set A and set B. There's mostly, I've gone off camera the wrong way, mostly these three colours, but a little bit of the rust shade in there as well. These are really ideal for finishing exhausts because they do have the right sort of dry dusty look about them, because they're basically pastels. And I have finished these a little bit more, they're a bit lighter in hue than I would a wartime exhaust because of modern fuels being a bit less leady. So that's it, that's all I've got left to fit. So I'm going to do that, and I will come back to you with a complete model and a wash up in a short while. And here it is done, completed. The model has come to the finish line in an absolute blur, a little bit like the Lysander before it, and in that case I sort of likened it to a sense of disappointment that the model was completed, because I was enjoying working on it so much. I don't feel disappointment this time, but I feel almost slightly surprised that it all went so easily. And that's not because I expect it to not go easily, really. It just did go very, very easily, and you know, 1 minute you're putting decals on and the next it's finished, seemingly. So I have added seat harnesses. These were in the build video. The 3D decal style of seat harnesses, which I got from Hallett's. And I have changed the markings, so I added decals from a sheet by DK Decals, which I also got from Hallett's. They aren't 100% correct for the aircraft as she is now. The J on the JW is painted slightly different on the real thing, but I don't mind, it's close enough. I used Tamiya Spitfire specific paints throughout, so the XF81, 82 and 83 combo. These are my favourite paints for this scheme, and I think you can probably see why. I used masking putty worms for the camouflage demarcations. If I were to do it again, I would possibly be a bit less lazy and freehand it, because the demarcations are a tad sharp compared to the real thing. But beyond that, it's fine. But it's fine, it looks good. It is a beautiful, beautiful model. I have got nothing but praise for Airfix on this. It's just gone together so nicely with so little trouble. I'm actually speechless. I'm actually slightly speechless about the whole thing. It's not that I expect Airfix kits to be problematic, I don't, but at the same time this has just been an absolute breeze from start to finish. There's loads of detail in there, the interior looks brilliant, the transparencies look fab, you can really see into the thing. Everything about it, it's just the right amount of complexity and detail, I think, for a kit like this scale, this price point. It's absolutely spot on. Problems wise, the only problem I had was the slight lack of an excellent fit on this canopy piece. You may recall that I used an Edward rear canopy glass here, which was trimmed down. It's because it's slightly shorter on this kit, and potentially because it's a two-seater actually. So that is an Edward rear canopy transparency, and then I have cut the Airfix hood from its rear canopy and added it in. So it does now fit properly and it looks fine. Anybody who has built one or more Edward Spitfires and who keeps a spares box should have access to a rear canopy, because Edward provide many different options in all of their kits. Other than that, then a lot of care and messing around trimming to fit the kit part properly into this aperture will be necessary, and I would advise doing that whilst / before you trim these parts for the closed canopy. But I do think a lot of people will probably go for the open option anyway. I drilled out the kit exhaust, so these are the kit exhaust pipes, and they look absolutely fine. I don't see any good reason to upgrade those for resin, just drill them out. The kit wheels look good. I really like the way they've dealt with the undercarriage, the fitting of the legs, and the detail that is inherent within that assembly. It's spot on. It's just the right amount of detail. It's just the right amount of complication at roughly the right price. It's ideal. The only other major modification was, of course, the priming and rubbing down, which I do think was fully worth the effort, because the surface detail, although it is still quite obvious to look at, is nowhere near as intrusive as it was before I did that. I do still have a spinnable propeller, and here we are. I've added a very, very light little bit of exhaust smoke there, really nothing much. It is immaculate, unashamedly so. It's a warbird. And it really is an eye catcher. It's got a lovely, bright and happy look about it, I think. There's that slight staining on the underside, which is entirely completely prototypical. And of course a little bit of exhaust down that side as well. If you can see, if I hold still, the hollowed out exhaust stubs. So I'll overlay a couple of studio shots here for your viewing pleasure, but I have thoroughly enjoyed this build. It is a beautiful kit, as I've already said. Absolutely worth what Airfix are asking for it. And more importantly, potentially, I think for those of you out there that are not interested in building a two-seater, this should provide a precursor to the upcoming single seat release and how that kit is going to sit in the market. This is, compared to the Edward Spitfire 9, I'd say probably 90% as good. There is a little bit less detail in some places, but equally it's a lot less finicky. And I think I've had this conversation before with regards to comparing a Tamiya kit versus an Edward kit. The Edward kit always comes back to the fact that the Edward kit does have a bit more detail, but it's also a lot more fiddly. There's a much higher parts count, some of which is unnecessary in my opinion, and because of that, a bit more of a fiddly build. This is not in any way a fiddly build. The cockpits, there are a lot of parts and there's a lot of work to build the assembly up, but it's not unduly complicated despite that. It's not difficult to do. It's not fiddly, frankly, because Airfix haven't gone down the road of producing a multitude of tiny parts to make this detailed interior happen. It's more about clever parts breakdown and good moulding. And I think if Airfix wanted to lift their game just a few more percent and just to get a little bit closer to the top end of the competition, so I am talking Tamiya, Armour Hobby and Edward here, all they really need to do is supply some kind of seat harnesses, sensible seat harness option, whether that be 3D decals or tiny photo etch sheet or even a decent moulded in seat strap option, and a mask set. So I'll go back to a point I made I think earlier in one or other of these videos, that when this kit was announced I thought it was a real genius move, but I wasn't at all interested in building one. My mind was changed when I started to see reviews and pictures of what was included in the kit and how it looked. It was seeing what looked like a beautiful kit that made me want to build this, rather than it being a two-seat Spitfire. 'Cause as much as I love Spitfires, the two-seat one is aesthetically challenging, frankly. But on the other hand, like so many other people, I'm quite sure that a flighted something like this would be a very big tick in your life boxes. And like so many other people, this really is probably as close as I'll ever get to catching that particular dream, hence the title of this series. So I do want to thank Airfix for sending me this kit over in the first instance, so thank you very much to Dale for supplying this sample kit to me, and thank you all for watching. Huge thanks as ever to my members and to the people who support me on the Buy Me a Coffee app. Thank you very much to all of you. I hope you found this video enjoyable, useful, or both. And with all of that said, I think it only remains for me to say until next time, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out.